Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Hiding in the Shadows, How Threats Exploit the Unprepared, Episode 7 in our CMMC Why We Do It webinar series. Today's presentation is brought to you jointly by NeoSystems and SNC Defensible Security. I'm Don Carnevale, Marketing Director at NeoSystems, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the Q&A area within Zoom. We will have some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Also, we will make the webinar recording and presentation slides available to all registrants in the coming days. Now I'd like to introduce the host for today's discussion, Megan Kennett from NeoSystems. Megan?
Thank you, Don, and thank you everybody who's joining us today. Welcome to today's episode of CMMC Why We Do It, Hiding in the Shadows, the 7th in a series of cybersecurity-focused educational webinars where we analyze the connection between the modern threat landscape and the measures that counter those threats, so that you can make better, more informed choices about cybersecurity and reduce the risk of becoming a victim. For those of you joining for the first time, I highly encourage you to check out previous episodes of our CMMC Why We Do It series for some actionable strategies to help you be more secure and what that looks like on paper and in practice. Allow me to kick things off and make introductions. My name is Megan Kennett, Product Marketing Manager for CMMC Solutions at NeoSystems, and I'm honored to be the host of today's discussion. At NeoSystems, we're experts who live and breathe compliance reporting and regulatory requirements so our clients don't have to. We provide a range of IT and information security managed services and offer organizations an accelerated, affordable, low-risk path to CMMC compliance. And today I'm pleased to be joined by two gentlemen and thought leaders in the defense industry, Mr. Ed Bassett, Cybersecurity Evangelist at NeoSystems, and Robert Doherty, Chief Security Officer at SNC Defensible Security, the team that protects Sierra Nevada Corporation. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Megan. Great to be here.
So today we're going to cover some pretty hot topics. We're going to take you behind the scenes and share a real-life threat map with some compelling data and statistics. We're going to profile some of the more sophisticated nation-state threat organizations, and we're going to glean lessons learned on what these attacks teach us about the adversaries we face and the patterns they leave behind. We're going to review threat metrics like time to exploit and dwell time, and what you need to know about the detection window and the fact that it's shrinking. We'll highlight some classic bad actors playbooks and share advanced strategies and best practices for threat detection and prevention. We'll look ahead and consider how AI, machine learning, is impacting the current threat landscape and what you can do to stay resilient in the face of these advanced persistent threats. And finally, we'll tie it all back to the foundational standards of NIST 800-171 and CMMC, and we'll explore the answers together too. What if I told you that there are about nearly 18 million attempts to breach a single network in any given month on a large defense US-based contractor, with most of them coming from halfway across the world? Would data like this get your attention? So this is a pretty remarkable image, and it isn't fiction. These lines of attack are reaching across oceans, hundreds of thousands, even millions of attempts, and all of it invisible to the naked eye. So let me ask you, when you look at something like this and you see countries like the Netherlands or Romania at the top of the list, what does it tell you? And the numbers, 17 million blocked attacks in a month. How does one even begin to defend against something at this scale, Robert?
Thanks, Megan. So this is a screen capture of a live attack map that we keep up within our at all times on our video wall within our Security Operations Center. The numbers are pretty staggering, and this is just SNC's ingress and egress points to the internet or major locations here in the U.S. We typically see on average actually 20 million attempts every 24 hours. The number Megan was quoting are those attacks that we pay the most attention to. So those are sophisticated state-sponsored or nation-state threat actors, and we're looking for very specific things that we pay attention to. So it's really important, and I've got the map up behind me on my left shoulder as well. Um, so visibility is key. And without visibility, you really don't know what's happening to your organization from a cyber perspective. You can't protect what you can't see, essentially. That visibility provides you knowledge, and then with knowledge, you can make risk-based decisions on where you should apply your budget to better protect your company. But again, if this is happening to us, Sierra Nevada company, this is happening to you right now.
Thank you, Robert. The modern day threat landscape has really evolved. Today's adversaries are highly organized, well-resourced, and state profit and politically driven. They're not those lone, cowardly looking hackers wearing hoodies in dark cluttered basements anymore. It's unfortunate and it's dangerously misleading how the basement hacker image has been perpetuated by media and pop culture, and relying on these outdated stereotypes only leads to underestimating the sophistication of these nation state criminals. So, Robert, when we're talking about nation state intelligence agencies, advanced persistent threat groups, and the modern day espionage, who are we talking about, and how should we be visualizing this threat?
Yeah, so we track 4 countries primarily. So that'd be Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran as are the main state-sponsored threats for advanced persistent threats, and then their subsidiaries and affiliate groups. So what's important with the image and what Megan just said about that misperception of what a threat looks like, these are government employees for the most part. Although it's a foreign adversarial government, they go to very boring government office buildings to do their job. Their job is to break into your company and steal your intellectual property, steal your customer information, or obtain and then maintain persistence within your networks for some future activity. So this is just a picture of FSB headquarters in Moscow. And the next picture is an image of the Ministry of State Security for the government of China. And then, of course, both of those countries have many organizations within their intelligence apparatus, all of which have at least a portion of the cyber mission for those countries. So again, it's important to understand that we're up against tens of thousands of, if you will, federal employees for those adversarial nations, and their job is to break into your company and steal your intellectual property.
Pretty alarming. Okay, well, we've just explored the FSB, Russia's powerful internal intelligence arm, known for its precision, persistence, and psychological tactics. But understanding the organization is only going to get us so far. So to truly defend against them, we need to understand how they think and act. Robert, I think you've got a few slides that can help unpack that.
Yeah, absolutely. So our adversaries are in it for the long game. If you think of ransomware, malware, things of that nature that have a financial, they're after financial gain. Those are what we would typically call kind of smash and grab operations. They're in the news a lot. We've had some very substantial ransomware attacks in the last 10 years. If you think of WannaCry and NotPetya. So those impact organizations. Obviously, they interrupt operations and they cost a lot of money to clean up. And in some cases, with organizations paying the ransom, it could cost them a lot of money to pay the ransom and get their systems back. But that's not what we're talking about here. Or again, we're talking about these advanced persistent threats. Most of them are either state, they're employees within a foreign adversarial government, or they're state sponsored, meaning they're an affiliate group, and then they're funded and receive their marching orders from the government. So they're in it for the long term, just as we saw with Salt Typhoon recently with the U.S. telecom space. Being able to get access and then maintain that for a long period of time for some future objective is really what they're after, or getting into organizations like ours and then try to siphon out intellectual property or customer information. So this is a very slow, methodical approach, and it's for them on the cyber front. It's not that risky, because if they get caught, even though we might issue a warrant for their arrest, the likelihood of us actually being able to apprehend and arrest people and then prosecute them is very low.
Thank you, Robert.
And just looking at China specifically, again, cyber espionage is the preferred method because of the low risk nature, but that's not all that they do. If we were paying attention to the news this week, 2 Chinese nationals were intercepted, I believe, trying to get into an airport carrying a potential pathological agent that could have been devastating to our crops. So, I don't have all the details on that. The FBI is still investigating, but it's a multidisciplinary approach, typically using recruiting. If you've ever been hit up on LinkedIn because you're, an expert in your field and they're offering you a $500 Amazon gift card for 30 minutes of your time, stay away from those. Those are typically not what they appear to be. And then with all of the cases, looking back over the last 10 years, for us specifically being a cleared defense contractor, I'm most concerned about the close to 30% of incidents are aimed at organizations like us trying to steal defense technology. And what this ends up costing the American companies on average, and again, this is just Chinese intellectual property theft, is about $600 billion a year. That's the latest estimate from the US government.
Yeah, these numbers reflect strategy, very deliberate, long-term targeting of not just technology, but the people and the institutions behind it. All right. All right, times are tough for cyber pros, quite literally. The window of detection is shrinking and at an accelerated pace, making it harder for defenders to find and neutralize these threats. So when we talk about time to exploit, why does it matter to organizations that this has dropped so significantly?
Yeah, if you could detect and stop, or the sooner you can detect and stop, the faster you can limit the damage. So looking back to 2023, the average time for breakout, meaning once a threat actor was able to gain initial access to a system within your network, it would take them about 84 minutes to then move out of that system into other systems, or what we call lateral movement. And in 2024, that number dropped down to, I believe, 62 minutes. This year on track, we're on track in 2025 for it to be 48 minutes. So you can see this number shrinking over time, and it's a good indicator that they are using adversarial AI against us once they get into a network. And the fastest breakout that we've seen so far this year during a breach is 51 seconds. So the minute an adversary is able to gain access to a system, the clock starts ticking. Time is not your friend. Speed is survival.
All right, let's talk about one of the most overlooked and dangerous parts of the breach, dwell time. Turning this over to the other expert, Ed, how would you explain dwell time? And can you put some numbers to the story? And you're on mute.
There I am. Robert was talking about the speed at which they're able to break out, right, from initial to some lateral movement. And dwell time is kind of the next phase, is how much of that lateral movement can they do and how long can they keep it up without detection. And so it's that period of time where the attackers are inside the network undetected. They're watching, they're learning, they're moving laterally. Maybe they're exfiltrating data. This could be weeks or months, could be a long time. Sometimes they're there long enough that they end up knowing the target environment better than the people that are managing it, right? Statistic on the screen is for medium-sized breaches, so 208 days until detection. We've talked a little bit about this statistic in previous episodes, but it's an incredibly long time, over half a year, that we're looking at. And again, this is intruders that have broken in, established persistent access, coming and going somewhat as they please, right, at that point, for over 6 months without anybody who's running the system noticing that. Can you click ahead to the next slide? The or next animation, I guess. Backup one. Yeah, good. 82% of the time, who notices is somebody external, right? So the victim isn't detecting this even after 6 months of intrusion, ongoing intrusion. They're not detecting it themselves. They're being notified potentially by a third party who notices it, law enforcement potentially, especially if they're breaking up some kind of an operation and they know that this company has been victimized because of records they might have gathered from the attackers and that sort of thing. And then some percentage of that is the attackers actually notifying the victim that they've been breached because they want to start an extortion scheme. They want to start getting some ransom or getting some money out of the target. So 6 months of dwell time, 82% of the time they're sort of never discovering it, right? Let's go to the next animation there. Once that breach is known, so they've discovered it or they've been told about it, we're looking at 60 days on average to fully recover the system. So even if no data is taken or damaged in the attack, just clearing out the attacker's footprint and getting systems back to their full production capability is a couple of months of hard work. And so that's going to come at a cost. And the statistics show that. You can click ahead to the next one. The statistics show that that's around $5 million on average. And again, this is for a medium-sized breach. This is lost productivity, reassignment of those IT workers, remediating weaknesses that enabled the breach in the first place. So all the things around sort of repairing, recovering, getting system back online.
You don't get the 60 days by accident. That's not just the tech gap. It's a visibility crisis, right? It means attackers know your network better than you do. And it also means defenders have to be able to react quickly, really quickly, once a threat's detected, which reinforces the notion of breaking down security silos and having that cross-team cooperation, cross-tool integration to be able to respond and eliminate the threat.
Very much so. Very much.
All right. So Robert, as the Chief Security Officer of a highly sophisticated defense operation, how do you prioritize and focus on what matters most to the organization?
Again, going back to the foundational, the problem, if you can't protect what you can't see. So real-time threat detection is critical for us to identify and halt things before they have the potential to do damage. We're not immune from these attacks. Our SOC has detected in the last year 2 what we would call pre-0 day attacks, meaning there's no vulnerability even published or known, but the behavior of a system changed quickly from a baseline. The SOC picked up on that, was able to respond to that threat within a matter of minutes. Unfortunately, that's not always the case for including very large organizations to where they're not able to detect things quickly. They lack that real-time threat detection. They're waiting on a system to send them an alert to tell them that they've got a problem. Identity and access controls, we really are referring to this now as just simply logging in. Going back to the MGM attack and using social engineering, somebody was able to just get credentials and log straight into a system. And once they had access, it turned out to be a very bad day, actually a very bad few weeks for that organization. So we're making sure that those identity access controls are fully saturated across all systems, and then we're monitoring for any changes to those profiles. And then I think probably the most important, if I was to leave anybody with anything today, is you have to have a mindset that you have to assume that you are breached. You have to be proactively hunting for these behaviors in your system so that you have that real-time threat detection. You're able to detect it as soon as it happens. You're able to react accordingly and prevent from damage. You will eventually, something is going to happen. You will be breached, and you need to be prepared for it. That mindset sets you up for success.
Thank you, Robert. So we're seeing faster times to exploit and with a longer dwell time. So with that understanding, Ed, is anything changing from the bad actors playbook of yesterday to today?
Yeah, good question. We've looked at this playbook in each of the episodes we've done so far. Overall, I think the playbook the basic structure of the attack has not changed, but some of the steps have become much more effective and much more efficient for our adversaries. So keeping in mind, not all attacks follow the sequence exactly, but the steps we're showing are still the typical approach of cyber intruders. When we look at the trend towards a faster time to exploit that Robert mentioned, this is because actors are improving both speed and effectiveness of steps 2 and 3. So for step 2, they're using automated means, including AI, to find exploitable weaknesses nearly instantly. And once they see those, they're able to step in and exploit them, again, using automated techniques in a very, very fast way. So if a vulnerability appears, they exploit it, they're in the system. In step 3, which is your phishing and your pretexting, we've seen a really big uptick in the quality of those attacks. The attackers are using AI to create very convincing emails, text messages, even voice phone calls. So the days when you could recognize phishing because of grammatical errors or bad English, that's over. These now look very real, and they trick a very high percentage of users, even those that are really well trained security experts that are suspicious of this stuff. They very hard to tell real from fake anymore. And so that means for the attacker, it means it's a faster, more reliable method of gaining access. When we look at the dwell time statistic that I was talking about earlier, the methods that are being used in step 4 for avoiding detection have become very targeted. So for example, attackers will now profile the specific make and model of the intrusion detection products that a company is using to defend its perimeter, and then they adapt their stealth techniques to specifically evade that technology. So they have profiles built into the attack tools that are tested in a lab against these commercial products to make sure that they don't set off any alarm bells. They've become really good at this sort of flying under the radar behavior, and that's why we're seeing sort of 6-month dwell time without detection. And as I noted before, 85% of the time, the victim's never detecting the attack themselves, right? So those detection methods, not just taking 6 months, they're effectively not working at all. That means that our detection methods, have really fallen behind the stealth techniques that are being deployed. And that lets them carry out steps 5 through 7, those later steps, over very long periods of time. So it gives them a lot of luxury to try different things, and maybe more success in getting to step 7, where they get to the crown jewels. So potentially having a pretty large footprint without setting off any alarms.
Great overview. Thank you, Ed. All right, so we've covered the who, what, and the how these nation-state actors are organized and what makes them strong. But can you help me break down why they are succeeding, Ed?
So at the end of the day, if you look at offenses versus defenses, it's got to come down to we're doing some things wrong, right? We haven't evolved our defenses in the same way as the threat has evolved in the ways we've just talked about. So we have the technology, we have the methods that are needed to stay ahead of these, but as we can see from the statistics, those are not standard practice today. We're not keeping up sort of on average, right? The attackers have a really high level of visibility into exploitable weaknesses. They can find them fast, they can exploit them fast. We need to be equally vigilant. So that, fortunately, the same detection technology that they're using is available for us to use on defensive use, right? We need to really strive for maximum visibility into the state of our systems. We need to know them better than the attackers can know them. That should be possible. It makes sense, right? We own them. We have insider knowledge. The days when you could do like a weekly manual log review with some security analyst looking over reams of virtual paper, those days are over. And maybe that was never really an effective way to do log review. I question whether it was, but a lot of people did it. But today, it's most certainly a waste of time to have humans looking at logs after the fact. We need to be collecting logs across all forms of system activity. So this means our network perimeter, our endpoints, our servers, our cloud services, all of it. And we need to have real-time detection that's capable of identifying anomalous behavior. And that's the key, right? It has to be able to actually detect the kind of things that threat attackers are doing. So Robert's going to talk a little bit more detail later on some of those detection methods. But in today's world, that's got to include machine learning and preferably AI to do that detection fast enough for it to be effective. So the older sort of static rules-based detection systems, right? The signature-based antivirus and those kind of methods that we used in the past no longer adequate. I guess another piece of this is the mindset. It's very common to invest in some new security technology and assume that your worries are over. That's kind of a checklist approach. I got a firewall, check. Intrusion prevention, check. Antivirus, check. It misses the fact that the attackers know how to bypass those commercially available tools unless they're being actively managed and actively monitored. If you just buy them, set them and forget them, they're already simulated that in their lab. They know how to work around it. Don't do that and trust the technology to detect and block attacks. You really need to have those active defenses. The last thing I'll mention, key factor in this excessive dwell time is a lot of people still trusting a strong perimeter. They lock the door and they say, we kind of trust what's inside. That's an old school way of thinking about network security. It was effective for a lot of years. And now through phishing and other means that we just talked about, attackers are very quickly able to bypass that perimeter and conduct their attack from a foothold that they've established inside the system where their actions are not subject to much scrutiny. So it's important to shift towards a zero trust approach where every transaction, every system activity is checked, regardless of whether it's coming from the outside or the inside.
Thank you so much. And contrasting outcomes, Robert, I know you have a personal case study that you'd like to speak to.
Yeah, I've got a couple. So back, if you remember SolarWinds, I think the initial breach of the company that was developing the software happened in late 2019.
Oh, yeah.
And then the compromised version was pushed out in early 2020. We were running the vulnerable system, just like a lot of federal agencies, large organizations. That system attempted to dial out, to make a connection outside of the network that it was not authorized to do. So going back to some of the things Ed was just talking about, we don't trust that the stuff on the perimeter is set in, we don't set it and forget it, we set it and monitor it. So when that system attempted to dial out, we detected that. We had no context as to why it was doing that. There was abnormal behavior from the baseline that we'd established for it. So we made sure it couldn't do that again. And then we went on about our business. It never made a second attempt. It only made that one attempt. And of course, later in 2020, the news breaks that a lot of very large organizations, including federal agencies, were wrecked because they were not able to detect that outbound connection. Threat actor was then able to use that to then gain access to those internal systems. So that very simple deny by default outbound rule. So again, we're paying just as much attention to what's attempting to leave the boundary as what's trying to get in, really saved our bacon, so to speak, from a pretty significant breach. And then a second, this is going back to kind of the process and having visibility into the changes that are happening within your environment. SNC has a weekly meeting we call the SRB. It's a security review board. So anything that is a security relevant change to any system in our environment has to go through SRB approval process. And we vet that for risk. And then if it's a significant enough risk that I can't approve, it's got to go up further in the leadership chain to make an approval or deny that change. Quick example, a couple of years ago, somebody that had access authorized to make changes on an external firewall thought they could just go in 5 minutes, make a quick change, no need to go through the approved process. They could make it, get back out of it very quickly. What happened, of course, is it took them much longer to reverse the change than what they thought. In that short window of vulnerability, when we essentially had a pinhole poked in our external firewall, Russia and China noticed that pinhole, just like Ed was talking about that automated scanning. So they know immediately when there's a change to the environment. They flooded into our demilitarized zone where all of our internet-facing systems used to be on-prem, and they attempted to brute force their way into all those systems to the tune of about 9 million attempts in about a 30-minute window. So to give you the idea that, from a volume and speed perspective, they turned some machines loose against us to do brute force attempts with multiple logons. I don't know the total number per second, but you can do the math. So that's the kind of thing that you need to be concerned about, that they have you mapped. If you're connected to the internet, they know all your systems. When a vulnerability comes up, like Ed said, and you don't patch that vulnerability very quickly, they can exploit that and get in. Or they're monitoring your network perimeter for any change, like what happened here, where there's a pinhole poked in that perimeter, and then they're able to exploit that very quickly.
It's really incredible, the brute force approach. All right, so this is moving on to Operation C919, China's coordinated espionage campaign targeting U.S. aerospace firms. It involved malware, insiders, a fake wedding trip to deliver trade secrets. It all came to head when Chinese intel officer Zhu Yanjun was arrested in a sting led by the FBI. Robert, break this down for us. What does this case reveal about how far state actors will go and where our defenses need to catch up?
Yeah, so this is a very recent example. There's some good case study material out there on this. If you would like to dive in further, China set about building a regional jet that would compete with the Airbus 300 platform and the Boeing 737 platform. They partnered with a lot of European and U.S. organizations to build that aircraft. Unbeknownst to those partner organizations, they started recruiting insiders. They started placing engineers inside those organizations. Then they started using external connectivity because of the partnership to exploit. And then, Megan, as you mentioned, implant malware that would allow them to obtain and then maintain persistent access to those partner networks. So several U.S. companies were involved. That list of the image of the aircraft shows a lot of them up there with the different components that were just flat out stolen that helped lead to the development of this aircraft. But this is what full spectrum espionage looks like. So again, if you're in the DIB, you're a defense contractor, it won't only be cyber. It could possibly be actual people in the targeting and recruiting of your employees to try to gain unauthorized access and then eventually get that information out and back to a Chinese threat actor. Megan, you're on mute.
All right, we've looked at threat maps. We've analyzed nation-state threat actors, the organizations they work for, their tactics. We've covered some basic hygiene in earlier episodes. Today, we're going to run through some more advanced techniques for detecting and responding to threats. So building on some of these foundations covered in earlier episodes, Ed, can you walk us through some best practices for prevention as we look to counter the modern day threat and espionage?
So as Robert said at the start, speed is survival, right? So the attackers, as we talked, are using automation and AI, and they're moving very fast. So the first thing is we got to move at that speed. All our defenses must be real time. So collecting logs in real time is pretty standard. Everybody's been doing that for a while, but it's important to analyze them in real time as well. First, I want to have the visibility and then establish the detection. So in today's environment, that means having security agents everywhere, not just an IPS on your internet gateway, but also on your endpoints. So taking that antivirus and upgrading it to real-time behavior analysis with automated blocking. In the cloud, it means taking advantage of the built-in security features that the cloud provider might offer to watch activity. Again, blocking things in real time if possible, alerting if not. Did we just see a user log in from 2 different continents simultaneously? Do we see a user requesting access to 10,000 patient records within a 5-minute time frame, right? So these are the kind of anomalous behaviors that it's important to not just send an alert to somebody's inbox and hope they see it tomorrow. It's important to take action immediately on some of those kinds of activities. As we talked about in an earlier episode, locking the front door still important, right? So strict access controls and no exploitable vulnerabilities. Robert really emphasized the speed in the case studies, right? Not even for a short time, not even for testing, not even because the CEO really needs to log in without MFA. The speed that they're moving at is faster than the speed at which you're going to put something in there, test it, and take it away, or maybe you forgot to take it away and it stays for months. So that's those kind of practices really need to sort of iron out of your operational mindset. We talked in an earlier episode about the value of this assumed breach mindset. So instead of feeling confident that your defenses are in good shape until some hypothetical alarm goes off, start every day looking for the breaches in your system. Assume that it's already happened. Proactively hunt for their activities. Don't feel confident until you finish making sure they're not inside your system. Alerting only works if it's dynamic and sensitive. As we mentioned before, The adversaries know the default alerts of commercial products and how to avoid triggering them. So proactive tuning, preferably led by machine learning or AI, baselining your system and its normal behavior so that you can really detect when something is abnormal. Focus that on your critical assets first. Make sure you get the most out of the security tools that you've already put in place and they're already available from your cloud providers. Last thing I'll mention, active response is needed, right? So make sure that workflow is well defined and practiced frequently. A response team that tries to tune out all the false positives because those alerts are really annoying. They're going to tune out the true positives too, in almost all cases. So, my advice is accept some noise. Don't ever say, great, now we've got that perfect. There is no perfect. There's this constant motion to try to stay ahead of the threat. Keep tuning, keep responding, keep looking for that needle in the haystack.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ed. That was great. All right, so we've covered threat actors, their tactics, the sheer scale of modern day espionage. But as we look ahead, one thing becomes undeniable. Our adversaries aren't just getting bigger and bolder, they're getting smarter and faster. They're using machine learning. They've been using machine learning, automation, and AI for a very long time, and they're not slowing down. So Robert, walk us into that next layer. And how is AI reshaping the mindset of the modern defender? And what does it mean to build detection that actually learns and evolves? And is there anything you'd like to share about how SNC Defensible Security is leveraging AI, not just to respond, but to anticipate?
Yeah, absolutely, Megan. Thanks. So the first problem you have with is and it's not a problem. I shouldn't have phrased it that way. A human being can only take in so much information at a time and then analyze that and look for patterns of behavior. Human beings are really good at identifying patterns of behavior, but not when it comes to the volumes of data that our modern systems produce every day. Just for our organization alone, just for SNC, we produce terabytes of log information every 24 hours that has to be collected, analyzed real time, and then look for that anomalous behavior or change in baseline activity on both our systems and our people across thousands and thousands of assets, our data centers, as well as cloud assets, and our people that are working globally. So that's the first problem. You've got all of this information. How do you analyze it from a human perspective? It's really an impossible problem. So we started looking at applying machine learning to this problem several years ago. And then the first indicator that we had that the approach was working for us, going all the way back to early days of COVID, we had already established a baseline of what normal looked like from China. So China and then all the countries that China likes to operate out of, what does it look like for them every 24 hours from an attack standpoint? And then when that first started making news, the American government at that time was telling us, hey, that's a China problem. We don't have much to worry about over here. There's no reported cases in the US. But in a 2-week period that we were monitoring Chinese activity, we saw that activity literally plummet to almost zero. So from millions of attempts every 24 hours to almost zero, told us that, hey, this thing is probably a much bigger problem than we understand right now. And they can't get in to go to work. And they also can't get in remotely to go to work. So that country's essentially going on lockdown. Machine learning initially showed us that, hey, there's a problem. You're starting to see an immediate trend down. And then within that 2-week time period, it almost cratered except for their automated scanning. So we were able to spin up our response to that very quickly and successfully move people to remote and do all sorts of things. I don't want to elaborate and kind of revisit the COVID area. But that one thing that we were tracking with machine learning put us in a position to not only be able to survive during the whole COVID era, but actually be very productive and profitable and not have any impacts. So all that data, human being can't really assess all that. And I've seen attacks that are, unless the analyst was to show me on a chart, like, look, this little tiny blip right here is where machine learning and our AI platform told us that system's never done that before, or that system has never done these combinations before. We went to go look at that, and sure enough, we found that something wasn't correct on that system. So when you think of volumes of data, you have to have the ability to process it in real time. As Ed was saying, the days of being able to go back and then review logs after they're collected, past tense, you can't do that anymore. So that's where we're really applying machine learning and AI to solve that big data problem primarily. Second is we're automating a lot of the lower level functions that an analyst would do so that they're freed up to do higher level work. So they're able to think and pull threads on problems, ask hard questions, things of that nature. And ultimately, we're getting to a position to where agentic AI will take actions for us that are pre-authorized to make changes to a system, to shut off access, to turn something off, to make an update, things of that nature, without human intervention. So that's ultimately where we're heading with AI in the platform.
Thank you, Robert. All right, so let's bring it back to why we're here in the first place, right, Ed? We've looked at the threat landscape and how attackers move, what motivates them, but what does good defense look like on paper and in practice? So Ed, take us through the NIST controls that matter here and what's in scope when we're talking about leveling up our threat detection and response game.
In this series, this 7 of 8 series here, we've been talking through the NIST controls that underpin CMMC and trying to highlight why did the government choose these to be requirements in the first place. And related to today's topic about advanced threat detection and response, there's really 3 control families in the 800-171 standard that are relevant here. So system and information integrity, audit and accountability, and incident response. So let's take a walk through what the government's asked us to do or mandated that we do, and kind of tie that back to some of the things we've talked about today with respect to the threat. So system information integrity, these controls all focus on preventing unauthorized changes to our systems. So this control family covers a pretty broad swath of controls. Finding and fixing flaws in our hardware and software quickly, ensuring that malicious code doesn't get installed and run on our systems, noticing and taking action when something suspicious or dangerous is going on, detecting when an attack is focused on our system and stopping it, and noticing when unauthorized activity has occurred. So that last one is kind of that very, very end of the standard is always my favorite, because it's like, yeah, notice when bad things happen. Please pay attention. NIST gives us quite a bit of latitude in how to achieve these goals, but the intent is pretty clear. We need to have defenses that are effective against the sort of threat actions we've talked about today. So I think if you think about what is the government asking us to do, it's saying, get those active defenses in place. Make sure your defenses are adapting to the way the threat's working. Make sure that you have enough visibility and that you have defenses that work in real time. Do they specifically mandate that it has to be that way? No, they give quite a bit of latitude. But if you put an ineffective defense in that just checks the compliance box, you've spent money, you might demonstrate compliance, you don't stop the attack, so you're still paying all those penalties. So I think as we've talked before in this series, part of the mindset here is do what the requirement says, but do it in a way that you get the security benefit for your investment. And I think in this control family for sure is where very big payoff is. And also it's the biggest, but it's one that's easy to do the minimum and end up with something that's completely ineffective. As Robert said, I mentioned earlier, manual review of logs. Is it permissible under the standard? Perhaps. It's completely ineffective. So it's not a good way to demonstrate compliance. Let's go to the next slide. Audit and accountability is about visibility. So making sure we have good records of our system activity and that we can tie that activity back to a specific person or process acting on behalf of a specific person. So we know who did it, and we know when they did it. So the NIST requirement includes requirements that are intended to make sure that these records that we collect are useful. So they say, we got to synchronize the timestamps. We got to protect them from modification or deletion by an attacker, so they can't just cover their tracks by getting rid of the audit logs. We have to correlate across different system components so that a problem in one place and a problem in another place might be a pattern of behavior that we need to notice. NIST also requires us to have the capability to use those logs when we investigate and respond. So that is not just good enough to collect the logs, they have to be useful, and we have to have the tools and the capability to use them in an effective way for incident response. Let's click ahead to the next one, and we'll talk a little bit about incident response. So the NIST standard requires advanced planning for incident response. So we have to prepare this ahead of time. So it's not just about responding when there is an incident, but there's a requirement that we plan that out, recognizing that in an emergency, we're probably not going to do very good if we don't have a plan, if we haven't practiced that plan. They talk about all aspects of incident response. So detection, which we talked a lot about today, noticing that a breach has occurred, analyzing the damage, and containing the intrusion to prevent additional damage, and then recovering our systems and data back to an accurate, productive state. All those things need to be included in the planning. NIST also requires that these plans be tested through exercises, other methods to make sure that those plans are going to work when a real incident occurs. There's also some reporting requirements, so tracking and reporting, so we have a solid record of the breaches, and we can learn from our experience, share that with others, etc.
Thank you, Ed. That was great. All right, wrapping up with some key takeaways. The threat actor moves fast. You got to keep your systems patched and your defenses dynamic and agile. So long as those critical vulnerabilities go unpatched, attackers won't hesitate to weaponize them. Whether it's running code or climbing the ladder of system access, delay gives them the opening. So speed is survival. Visibility is key. Keep your systems patched and your defenses dynamic. Visibility is key. These threat actors are quiet. The attacks are invisible, and they're experts at evading detection. So having that top-notch visibility with cross-team tool integration with automated alerting is critical. And looking at AI and automation, keep in mind these threat actors are already using AI and have been for quite some time. They're getting smarter, they're getting faster, they're automating. Don't let them stay ahead. All right. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Please be sure and join us for our next and final episode of our CMMC Why We Do It series, Working Hard or Hardly Working, where we examine the ways in which threat actors access potential targets to determine the threat and the strength of their defenses, and how you can use similar techniques to monitor and assess whether your security measures are effective and working as intended.
We've got some really good audience questions that came in on the Q&A. So
excellent.
Yes, thanks, Ed. So I was just going to get into those. The first one is, in the case studies where threats were not caught, what was the biggest mistake or thing they missed that caused the failure?
Great question. On the two case studies that I provided for SNC, in both instances, those were caught. Those were caught within literally seconds of them happening. So the safeguards that we had put in place worked. Just like with the unauthorized change in the firewall, our SOC noticed that influx of threat activity into the DMZ and immediately took action to track down what had occurred, what had happened, and then work with the system owners of the firewalls to then reverse that change. So thankfully, no damage in either of those cases. On some of the other case studies we talked about, specifically on the COMAC C919, some of the basics, say they weren't monitoring what was leaving the network. So when data exfil happens, if you don't have the ability, data loss prevention is only as good as what it can see, and only as good as what it can detect, when it's attempting to leave your perimeter. And you should not depend entirely on a DLP solution. People, especially smart threat actors or insiders, can bypass that. If they've given some type of exception on your deny by default rules, going outbound, they can encrypt traffic, make it look like other approved encrypted traffic, and then get that outside your network. So being able to monitor what's attempting to leave your network is just as important as what's attempting to enter your network. And then just not having real-time threat detection is probably what has cost organizations the most on breaches. The statistics we gave were from several reports that are produced every year. The numbers keep getting worse every year. That people are just not implementing the tools properly that they have in place, or they don't have the capability to then monitor all that data that those systems are producing to notice, very, very small differences in behavior for a system.
I think the biggest is, I think it was just in a general sense about, when these things go undetected for a long time. A lot of times it's that there was no detection there. So the logs were there. So in the investigation, when you go back and look, you can see evidence in the logs of the threat actions. But at the time that it happened in real time, as Robert talked about, there's no detection happening against that log. So we have the visibility, but it doesn't raise an alarm. It doesn't cause anything to happen. It just gets tracked in a log and buried in there in a mound of data that nobody's really looking at in an effective way. And until after the fact, right after the notification, start digging around. We're like, oh, there it is. But that isn't. It's too late. Way too late.
Okay, next question is, how do you confirm the efficacy of AI analyzing logs, and what do you do about false positives and negatives?
I can take that one real quick. We keep a human in the loop. So we go in and assess that system's accuracy on a very frequent basis. And through that process over the last couple of years, we've been able to fine tune the system so that the false positives, false negatives are down to a known number, and kind of we anticipate the system to produce over time. That takes work. It takes expertise, to be able to understand what they're looking for, validate that the logs are accurate, and then just performing, those spot assessments or those periodic audits of that data.
I think there's an emphasis sometimes on operations team on really getting that false positive rate down too low.
Yeah.
A false positive is a lot cheaper than a false negative. You know what I mean? Like,
True.
So
Yeah.
accept some false positives. It's part of the game. You're going to investigate things, and there's going to turn out to be normal user behavior. Calling that user, checking on it, and having them verify, yeah, that was me doing that stuff, and it was totally legitimate. That takes only a few minutes of investigating time. Nothing compared to missing a real intrusion.
Yeah, the security teams really they should be operating, again, for the assumption that something has happened, not like, oh, I don't want to disturb, I don't want to wake somebody up in the middle of the night with this potential issue. We would much rather overreact initially within the security group, not necessarily involving other departments, until we have a confirmation that it's a real event or not. So if you're a security professional, your job is to not trust anything, but validate everything. So it's always better to overreact initially, within your own organization rather than doing nothing.
Okay, do have a few other questions here. One is, CMMC is expensive. Are these measures you're describing really affordable to small businesses or only for the big contractors?
I'll take that. I think that's been a mission at NeoSystems. Many years really took shape as CMMC came out, and we saw that the government was going to apply the exact same requirements to small businesses as big businesses, same set of expectations. And we said, how do we scale these things to make them affordable to a small business? And there's a few ways. One is a managed services model, right? So instead of each company buying and building this entire stack of complicated security technology and operational staff, we've built it at a managed service level, and then let people buy into that stack of expertise and tools. So that economy of scale by collecting them together, standardization by not customizing it for every single customer, right? In the same way that a big business wouldn't customize their security approach for every department, they would standardize across the corporation. We've adopted standard reference architectures and let people choose those when it meets their business needs, and they save the cost of customizing. So through those two things, standardizing on reference architectures that are proven that we know work, and by making things available in a managed services model, so you're just paying for consumption, right? You don't have the upfront design and build cost. We're able to keep the cost pretty low for small and mid-sized businesses who want to tap directly into the kind of sophisticated technologies that you hear Robert talking about today.
I think the last question we have time for is, you mentioned AI helping both attackers and defenders. How should we be adding AI into our CMMC plans?
Oh, that's a great question, Don. I'd say proceed with caution. So if you're using any SaaS platform today, hopefully it's a FedRAMP authorized platform, you need to be monitoring for changes that they may enable AI capability without notifying you. And then all of a sudden you find out that there's somebody's has essentially a backdoor with the ability for information to leave your organization into a platform that you don't necessarily control. So you need to stay on top of your SaaS providers. They need to be communicating roadmaps and any future plans to enable or turn on AI so that you're involved, and then you can fully assess the risk that might be posed by bringing those technologies into your environment. We're a pretty early adopter of AI, so working with some of our larger tech partners, we're able to figure out how to do it in a secure fashion to make sure that our data was staying inside our environment. It was not being used to train a public model, and that we had all of the security controls there and could audit its use. What was the second part, Don?
How should we be adding AI into our CMMC plans?
Well, that's a great question. Ed, do you have any insight? Know your thoughts on that part?
Yeah, I think we're all doing AI to help sort of worker productivity, right? So for a lot of, Robert, you mentioned earlier, the sort of mundane things that take up the time of skilled employees, if they can offload that to AI, they can focus more of their attention on the skill set that they have. But I think in terms of directly integrating it with CMMC plans, it's going to be on the detection, working through that mountain of data and being able to notice anomalous behavior out versus non-anomalous behavior. I think that, Robert, you said earlier, humans are very good at detecting anomalous behavior. They just do it really slow and for small volumes of behavior.
Right.
So that, I think, if you're thinking about where does AI fit most directly into your CMMC plan, I would say that's it. Detection engines. So the things that are doing your endpoint protection, your cloud activity monitoring, your network perimeter, like all those places where you want to detect bad things, look for solutions that have AI. And all the vendors are baking it in, right? They're all working hard to get it in there as fast as they can.
Yep.
So it's getting more and more accessible for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and the AI is only going to be as powerful and as intelligent as the information that it is connected to. So you want to make sure that you are accurate with identifying the assets in your baseline. So beginning with the correct information and the scope, that information, having those assets accurate and to begin with is a great place to start.
Don, I saw a question about the stats we presented. So those, just for the audience who was asking, member who was asking, the statistics came from the Verizon DBIR, which is their annual report of experience with handling an incident response, and some publications from CrowdStrike. So those two places, CrowdStrike and Verizon.
All right, so we are getting very close to the top of the hour, so I think we're going to conclude. Megan, if you wouldn't mind moving to that final slide.
I don't mind at all.
As you can see, these are the email addresses for our speakers. We want to thank everyone for attending today. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Certainly want to thank Megan, Ed, and Robert for their time and great insights into this important topic. As we mentioned earlier, this is episode 7 in our series. The 8th and final episode will be coming soon, so we look forward to putting that out for you all to register very soon. So please keep an eye out for that invitation soon. So that will conclude today's webinar. Thank you again for attending, and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care.